Hello, everyone. I'm David Vaucher. Welcome to Return on Racing. The Return on Racing podcast is powered by Vaucher Analytics, which helps drivers and race teams drive efficiencies off track so they can fuel success on track. The Return on Racing podcast is also brought to you by the Motorsport Sponsorship Accelerator, the most cutting edge resource out there for finding, sourcing, growing, and maintaining long term sponsorship relationships. In the previous episode of Return on Racing, we provided a breakdown of an LMGT3 racing team cost structure. This episode is going to take it even further based on the principle that when budgets are large in absolute terms, even small changes on a percentage basis can absolutely move the cash flow needle. If you're asking questions like, how much does it cost to run an LMGT3 car? Where are we overspending in our WEC GT3 team budget? How can we cut costs without compromising track performance? Then this cost reduction audit is your next move. I will say before we get into it, it is probably good to go visit the Vaucher Analytics website since this is going to be highly quantitative. And rather than read all of the numbers off to you, it's best just to refer you to the source data so you can look at the tables and get all of the information in an organized form. So whether you're a team principal, motorsports operations manager, or racing accountant, all of the questions I just listed can form the foundation of financial discipline. And in fact, they have to, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and you certainly can't optimize it. Everything I'm about to go through is based on public information, industry norms, and best practices tailored to the realities of operating in the WEC. This is not a write-up of any one team or structure, nor is it meant to ignore the many valid exceptions that arise in high-level racing. Every team is different after all. Yours is certainly going to be in that same category. The goal here, though, is to outline a framework for where value is most often left on the table so you can make the call on what most often applies. With that being said, let's get started. And I want to start with some important methodology and disclaimer clarifications. First, when undertaking any cost reduction exercise, it is important to start with the 80-20 rule, which states that 80% of the result comes from 20% of the initial effort. In other words, the categories that we are looking at in this article are non-exhaustive, but as the largest sources of spend, they should yield the most immediate and tangible cost savings. Additional studies could find savings in other smaller cost categories, but they would require more work and would likely yield smaller results, and really should only be undertaken once the larger cost areas are understood and controlled. Second, every team is different, so it is not likely that you will see a euro for euro match when comparing this article to your own financial statements. However, the methodology used to create this analysis could absolutely be applicable to your own racing structure. And third, with this in mind, none of these figures should be viewed as binding or set in stone, but rather as illustrative. So let's go ahead and get started with what I've referred to as Audit Area 0, which is set to answer the question, is your financial infrastructure race ready? Before implementing cost savings ideas for your racing team, stop and ask, do we have a centralized automated system to track every euro of racing team expenses and income? Are costs categorized by function, such as logistics, personnel, race prep, and activity, for instance, Spa versus Fuji? And third, can we produce financial statements, sponsor ROI reports, and real-time cash flow views at any time? Some teams will say their accounting is understood or handled by a single point of contact. That's not the same as scalable clarity. In a sport where budgets can swing six figures almost overnight, you need structured visibility, not just experience and gut feel. This is the foundation for everything. Without it, even the best cost savings ideas have no traction. So let's now get into the first area of potential savings. That's logistics and freight, with a 30,000 or more than 30,000 euro potential target in savings. Global WEC travel means complex shipping, but smart teams ask, are we optimizing sea versus air freight across the race calendar? Can we pre-position non-critical spares at regional hubs like Bahrain or Fuji? Are we using official WEC logistics partners or overpaying for convenience? It's true that some teams already negotiate hard on freight or have strong OEM support. Even so, in our experience, duplicated shipments, underused consolidated freight options, and reactive planning are common pain points. Tight planning isn't just optional, it really can be survival, and logistics, because it makes up such a large part of the overall cost structure, is where leaks can become floods. Conversely, due to its outsized importance in the overall budget, Getting this right often opens up budget for more competitive areas of the program. And just generally speaking, with large cost areas such as this, you want to make sure that you're running periodic checks. Even if everything is buckled down, it's likely that by just getting a fresh set of eyes on it every so often, there are potential savings and efficiencies that you can unlock. This gets us to audit area number two, more efficient personnel deployment, where you could look towards a 20 to 25,000 euro potential savings target. Personnel and travel are major line items in any motorsport team budget. Under the 2025 WEC sporting regulations, LMGT3 teams are limited to 32 declared operational staff for two cars across technical zones like the garage, pit lane, and working paddock. However, this cap applies specifically to those who interact directly with the car or its immediate support infrastructure. That opens the door to strategic flexibility. Smart teams could ask themselves, are there non technical roles that we're flying in unnecessarily? Could certain engineering functions be handled remotely, at least part of the season? Again, this will vary depending on the race team, but these are questions that you could at least ask yourself. Another question could be, are we properly classifying and declaring non operational personnel so we can stay compliant while trimming travel costs? This isn't about cutting corners. I'm in no way suggesting that. This is about surgical staffing to maintain cash. It's about maintaining full operational capability where it counts while offloading everything else. And if that only constitutes 2 to 3% of what you're already spending, then hey, that's 2 to 3%. And if you really can't do any of these operations, then at least you've taken a look and you have a process in place to do that every so often so that you can be ready to pounce if efficiencies do present themselves. The difference between a 38-person travel roster and a 32-person optimized structure could easily be 5 figures per flyaway event. Of course, culture matters. You want people in the loop. But when events like Sao Paulo or Fuji pile on costs, even shifting 2 roles to remote support can rebalance the budget without harming competitiveness. Although, again, this will be up to you to do the cost benefit analysis on. You might also even find some advantage to this strategy beyond cost savings, as handoffs can happen so that your team can effectively work around the clock on some functions. We're now in audit area 3, procurement and consumables, where you might look to target between 15 and 20,000 euros in potential savings. LMGT3 cars chew through parts, but are you buying smart? For example, are consumables bought at retail or through volume deals? Is your team forecasting usage or over purchasing just in case? Do you have anything to justify what the buffer volume that you have in stock? How have you run that analysis? Do your maintenance protocols favor preventative measures as much as possible? Do you have a system in place to track part wear and replacement? Have you explored supplier allowances with other teams within the boundaries of regulations and best practices for your series? Some teams will push back and say we can't afford to run out of parts, and there is no argument there. But stocking 3 times the historical usage rate of a brake duct that hasn't failed in 15 races, that's not caution, that's a capital drain, and it's inefficient working capital allocation. And of course, once you get on this rabbit hole, you start asking yourself, how do you track equipment usage? What is the safe buffer volume? This is a whole field of study. But even just starting to go down the path can yield significant savings if you find that you're overstocking parts. Or on the flip side, you're understocking parts and that's costing you elsewhere. That can absolutely count as a win as well in terms of cash flow. So teams should benchmark spare part turnover versus WEC event specific demands. Circuits like Spa and Fuji require different setups, and overpurchasing spares that never gets used just ties up capital. Because remember, asset management is effectively cash management. So, audit area 4, we are led to now is testing efficiency and simulation strategy. And here we could be looking at 8,000 euro in potential savings. Track testing is essential for tuning an LMGT3 car, but poorly planned, it becomes a budget sinkhole. Per the sporting regulations, LMGT3 teams must participate in the prologue official test in Qatar, which is already logistically complex and expensive. Other testing is possible in a private capacity, and this can also be logistically expensive. This is not to undercut the need for testing. That is not what I'm suggesting with this potential avenue for savings. All the component failure analyses in the world will not replace actual experiences on track, and teams will rightly say we test because we must. After all, you can test parts, you can test assemblies, but the only way you test a race car is by going racing. That's completely fair. But the question I'm asking isn't whether or not you should test. You should. It's whether every test session is actually maximizing return on costs. So, have you thought about the following recently? Do you go into every test with a clear set of hypotheses? Are you testing to confirm data or just because it's what you've always done? And could simulation testing replace at least one of the track tests this year, or at least replace a discrete set of testing criteria and testing time? Simulation is, of course, no longer a luxury, it's a competitive advantage. And because there is relatively little regulation around simulation testing versus track testing, it could be an area to open up cost savings. The cost of implementing a high end sim program could be offset by reduced wear on consumables, decreased need for on track mileage, and more structured testing plans. Simulation delivers setup correlation and tire deg modeling, driver training and familiarization, race strategy testing, and scenario simulation for wet dry transitions, four course yellow, and balance of performance shifts. Some teams don't have the resources for full time in house simulation. That's fair. But that doesn't mean the opportunity doesn't exist. Sim testing partnerships or shared rigs can provide access without the capital investment. And this is a great way to explore various types of sponsorship partnerships. For example, you partner with a sim company, you get the benefit of their sim and sim expertise, and they get the benefit of your on track expertise to fine tune the sim. It really is a virtuous circle. Referring back to the 80/20 rule I listed earlier, even a consumer level sim could be enough to refine your hypotheses before on track testing. Though every team will be different, the following could be options for yours: augmenting one test per quarter with structured simulation runs, using simulation to reduce guesswork and improve pretest confidence, building sim to track pipelines, validating in sim and executing at the circuit, and maximizing sim ROI by integrating with your sponsorship activation content. Again, there is a phenomenally wide open blue sky here for opportunities if you know the right questions to ask and if you know what it is you're trying to accomplish by using a sim setup. Track time is still king. I know I've said it before, but I want to make sure that that's understood. You test race cars by going to the test track, and you know that. I just want to make sure that you understand that I'm not saying anything otherwise. But simulation is such a powerful tool, and there is just so much more that can be done with simulation testing. It's not just about esport teams and playing pretend racer. There's legitimate cost saving value in exploring simulation. So teams that lean into simulation will spend less, they'll show up better prepared, and they'll have a data advantage when it matters. And again, because the regulations just aren't set in stone like they are for track testing, there's potential here to get an advantage if you know what you're trying to achieve at the endpoint. So enough on that. Let's move to area 5. This is unlocking sponsorship ROI with a 45,000 to 60,000 euro potential uplift. So we're shifting gears here a little bit. It's not so much about cutting costs. It's about really understanding and making more efficient your sponsorships so you can bring in more revenue. Now, of course, motorsport sponsorship isn't just about slapping logos on bodywork. Revenue comes from activation, and it comes from genuinely doing work for your sponsor and serving them with a spirit of service and understanding that if you want to win via their support, they have to win via the value that you create for them. So, some of the questions you can ask yourself here would be: are we creating local sponsor experiences at each race, for example, Japan and Brazil? And are those tailoring to the sponsor's customer base? So, if these are markets they want to access, how can you help them target those particular demographics even more? Another question would be: are drivers and engineers generating digital content with commercial value? Some of it is very sensitive, that's understood, but some of it could also be used to provide more value for your sponsors. Another question would be: does our paddock hospitality help sponsors close B2B deals? Because if you sold them the advantage of building their network at track events, then your facilities should facilitate the building of those networks at track events. You may think your sponsors are happy, but you know what they say about assuming. Yes, you want to make your sponsors happy today, but the best relationships are long term ones, where sponsorship candidates are beating a path to your door because they've heard that you move the needle for those already fortunate enough to have a spot on your car. Remember, ROI is the currency that keeps you on track. The best racing team sponsorship strategies make partners feel like part of the win, not just spectators in branded polo shirts. That requires storytelling, access, and measurable outcomes, not just hospitality tickets. Even minor upgrades to digital presence or regional specific package can unlock new tiers of funding, but it's up to you to really understand what your sponsors are looking for and how you can help bridge the gap between what it is they're looking for and what you can enable and offer. And that will do it for this episode of Return on Racing. I do want to encourage you to visit the Vosh Analytics website, since that is where all of the tabular detail will be located. And I think it'll just provide a bit more useful context to what you just listened to on this episode of Return on Racing. To make it easy, I'll just go ahead and put the link right at the top of the show notes. I want to thank you as always for spending your time with me on Return on Racing. And if you like this content, please consider signing up for the Return on Racing newsletter. You can do that via the front page of the Vosh Analytics website. That's www.voshanalytics.com. And what I aim to do is deliver the best sponsorship, best industry, best technical, and best business insights to you every week in under 500 words. So you get just what you need quickly so you can utilize those insights in your day-to-day activities and operations. With that, I want to thank you again, and I really look forward to spending more time with you on the next episode of Return on Racing.